They called me the king's wolf, and for a long time I let them, because a name like that does half a man's work before he ever draws his blade. I was the Duke of Harrowmore, and I had gone wherever the crown pointed and done whatever the crown could not be seen to do, and I had told myself that a man who keeps the kingdom's uglier secrets is still a kind of servant. I believed that the winter I was sent north to bury a woman I had never met. I do not believe it now. I tell you all of this so you will understand that when I first saw Nell Crew standing in the snow with her chin lifted and her boots ruined and death an hour behind her, I was the danger, not the men chasing her, me. The letter reached me at Harrowmore on the darkest night of the year, carried by a rider whose horse was near to foundering. I knew the seal before I broke it, not the king's own, but the seal of the men who wrote to me in the king's stead, the quiet men who never signed their names. The letter was short. A baron in the far dales had died of a wasting sickness. His death was orderly, and the succession was orderly, and the crown wished it to remain orderly. But there was a woman, an apothecary's daughter, who had tended him at the last, and she had begun to say a word that could not be allowed to spread, the word poison. She had said it to a magistrate's clerk and to a curate and to whoever else would listen, and now she had fled her village, and the crown wished the matter closed. Find her, the letter said. Close it. I read it twice by the fire, and then I burned it as I burned all of them, and I watched the paper curl, and I felt nothing at all, which is what I had trained myself to feel. Then I called for my horse. I want you to understand the country I rode into, because the country is half the story. The northern dales in deep midwinter are a white silence that goes on past the edge of the world. The moors were under snow to the height of a man's knee, and the dry stone walls that quilt those hills had vanished, so that the whole land was one unbroken sweep of gray-white under a sky the color of a blade. The becks were frozen at their edges and black and quick in their middles. Nothing moved but the wind, and the wind moved everything. I rode 2 days through it with my collar up and my face wrapped, and I met perhaps 4 souls, and each of them looked at me and looked away, because a man who rides alone through that country in that weather is either desperate or dangerous, and I did not look desperate. I found her village first. It was called Ellerby, a huddle of stone cottages in a fold of the hills with a church too big for it and an inn too small. I did not go to the inn. I went to the churchyard, where the fresh grave of a baron would be, because a fresh grave tells you things a living man will lie to hide. The baron's grave was there, the earth mounded and dark against the snow, the stone not yet cut. And beside it, kneeling, was an old man with his hat in his hands, and I nearly rode past him, but something in the set of his shoulders made me stop. "You knew him," I said. It was not a question. The old man looked up at me, and I saw fear come into his face, the particular fear that my kind of stranger brings, and I saw him decide to answer anyway because he was old and grief had made him reckless. "I served him 30 years, he said, "and they put him in the ground in 4 days, and they'll not let anyone say why." "He was sick," I said, watching him. "He was killed," the old man said, and then he flinched at his own words and looked about him, but there was no one on that white hillside but the 2 of us and the dead. The girl said so, the healer, Nell Crew. She said it wasn't any sickness she knew, that a body doesn't waste like that, doesn't burn like that, doesn't— He stopped. She said it was in the wine. The physician they brought down from York, the fine one, he said she was a hysterical girl, and he signed the paper, and they buried my lord before the ground was even hard. And now the girl's run off into the hills, and Sir Marcus has men out looking. And God help her when they find her, because I don't think they mean to bring her home. Sir Marcus, I turned the name over, the heir. "The brother," the old man said and spat. "Younger brother, Baron now, isn't he? Baron Marcus of Ellerby, that couldn't pay his debts a 12-month ago and gambled away his own portion, and now he's got the whole estate and a face at the funeral like a mourning saint." He looked up at me again, and this time the fear won because he had finally understood what I might be. "You're not one of his," he said. "Are you?" I could have lied. I was good at lying. It was one of the crown's chief uses for me. But the old man's grief had cut a small, clean window into the day, and through it I saw something I did not want to see, that the word I had been sent to bury might be true, that the woman I had been sent to silence might be the only honest voice in the dale. "No," I said, "I'm not one of his." It was not yet a lie in the other direction. It became one an hour later when I decided not to write to the quiet men and tell them what the old man had said. I told myself I was only gathering intelligence. I told myself I would close the matter as ordered once I understood it. A man can tell himself a great deal on a cold road. I found her the next morning. I had ridden out before light, following what the old man had let slip, that she had kin at a shepherd's cot on the high moor above Ellerby, a half-day's walk for a girl on foot, that she would make for it, and that Sir Marcus's men knew it too and had gone up ahead of her by the low road. So I took the high road, the shepherd's track, buried under snow but readable to a man who knows how a hillside lies, and I went up into the cloud that sat on the tops, and somewhere in that white blindness I heard her before I saw her, a sound that was not the wind, a small dogged rhythmic sound, and I came over a rise and there she was. She was perhaps 50 yards below me, struggling up a slope of drifted snow, and she was failing. I could see it in the way she moved. She would take 3 steps and sink to her thigh and haul herself out and take 3 more, and her skirts were frozen to the knee, and one of her boots had lost its heel, and she was leaving a track a blind man could follow. She had a satchel across her body, and she clutched it as she climbed as though it were the only thing keeping her from lying down in the snow. And below her, perhaps 200 yards below, 3 men on foot were coming up her track, and they were not failing. They were patient. They were closing. I have thought a great deal in the years since about the moment that followed, because everything I became began in it. I had been sent to find her. I had found her. All I had to do was nothing, sit my horse on the ridge in the cloud and let Sir Marcus's men do the work the crown wanted done, and ride home, and the word poison would die in the snow with the woman who spoke it, and the matter would be closed, and I would have kept my hands clean in the way that men like me tell ourselves is clean. I sat there. God forgive me, I sat there for the length of 3 or 4 breaths, and I considered it, because it was the ordered thing, the tidy thing, the thing the whole architecture of my life had been built to make easy. And then she looked up. She could not have seen me clearly. I was a dark shape in white cloud up the slope, a stranger on a horse. But she looked up at me across that white distance, and she did not scream and she did not run. She stopped climbing. She turned to face me, this ruined, frozen woman with 3 killers at her back, and she stood as straight as her failing legs would let her, and she waited because she had decided that whatever I was, she would meet me on her feet. I was near enough by then to see her face. It was not a beautiful face in the way the word is usually meant. It was too tired for that, and too cold, and too afraid. But it was steady. She had made herself steady. And in the second before I moved, I understood that I had spent 15 years killing my own conscience by inches, and that this small, steady, frightened woman had, without a word, without knowing what I was, refused to let me be the man I had made myself. I put my heels to my horse and went down that slope to her, and the snow flew, and the 3 men below shouted and began to run, and I reached her first. "Give me your hand," I said. She looked at my hand and she looked at my face, and she did not take it. "Who sent you?" she said. Her voice was hoarse with cold, but it did not shake. There was no time. The men were 50 yards off now, and one of them had a pistol out. "The same men who sent them," I said, because I would not begin this with a lie, "and I have changed my mind. Your hand, or you'll die on this hill in the next minute." She took my hand. I have never in my life felt anything as cold as that hand. I pulled her up before me across the saddle. She weighed nothing. She was half-starved and frozen through, and I wheeled the horse and we went up and over the ridge into the cloud as the pistol cracked behind us, and the ball went wide into the white. And that is how it began, not with a choice made cleanly in the warm, but with a hand taken on a hillside because a frightened woman had looked at me and made it impossible to do otherwise. We did not speak for a long time. I took us off her track entirely, doubling along the tops where the wind scoured the snow thin and left less sign, and the cloud closed behind us and hid us, and I felt her shivering against me, a deep continuous shudder that frightened me more than the men had, because I had seen men die of that cold and I knew how quiet it becomes at the end. I put my own cloak around her, over the frozen one, and she let me, which told me how far gone she was. "There's a bothy," she said at last through her teeth. "Below the Kelder Crags, a shooting hut, if it's still." "Then that's where they'll look," I said. "No," a pause while she gathered breath. "That's where they think I've gone. They'll look and they'll find it empty and burnt out. It burnt 2 winters past, there's only the walls, and then they'll look elsewhere. There's another, higher, my father," she stopped. Grief, I thought, or cold, or both. "My father kept a place higher up, a lambing shelter that no one knows but me. If I can get to it, I can." "Tell me where," I said, "and I'll take you there. And then you'll tell me everything from the beginning and you'll leave nothing out, and I'll decide what happens next." She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "You still haven't told me who you are." "No," I said, "I haven't." She did not ask again. I have wondered since whether she already suspected. She was a clever woman, cleverer than anyone in that dale had ever bothered to notice, and a clever woman who has just been pulled from death by a stranger who admits he was sent to do her harm does not need to be told his trade. But she said nothing, and I said nothing, and we climbed together into the high white silence, and behind us the men of a murderer cast about in the cloud and lost us. The shelter was where she said it would be, a low stone lambing hut built into the lee of a crag, its roof half of turf and half of gray slate, its door a hurdle of woven withies that you would not see unless you knew to look. Inside it was black dark and stank of old sheep and older peat smoke, and it was, by contrast with the moor, a kind of paradise because it was out of the wind. There was a hearth, and a stack of dry peat in the corner that her father had cut, she said, in a better year, and I got a fire lit with the flint from my saddle-bag while she sat with her back to the stone and shook. When the fire caught and the small red light bloomed up the walls, I looked at her properly for the first time, and I saw a young woman perhaps 25, with dark hair frozen into ropes at her temples and a face gone gray-white with cold, and a mouth set hard against the shivering, and eyes, I remember the eyes that watched me across the fire with a wariness that had nothing of self-pity in it. She was afraid, but she was thinking. She was measuring me even as she froze. I have commanded soldiers who could not do that. "Take off the boots," I said, "and the wet things. There's cold that kills after you're warm again if you stay wet. I'll turn my back." "You'll forgive me," she said, "if I don't much like being told to undress by a man who was sent to kill me." "I was sent to find you," I said. "The killing was the other men's brief." "A distinction," she said. "That would comfort me more if the finding and the killing didn't seem to travel together." I could not argue with that, so I did not. I gave her my back and I heard the small terrible sounds of a frozen woman peeling off frozen cloth, the hiss of her breath, once a stifled cry of pain when feeling came back into her feet, and I stood looking at the black stone wall, and I felt something I had not felt in longer than I could name, which was shame. Plain shame, the ordinary kind, that any decent man carries, and that I had gone to great lengths to be rid of. When she said, "You may turn round," she had wrapped herself in my cloak and drawn her knees up and was holding her bare hands out to the fire, and the shivering had begun, at last, to ease. "Now," I said, and sat down across the fire from her, "from the beginning." And she told me. Her name was Nell Crewe. Her father had been the apothecary at Ellerby, a careful, learned, unfashionable man who had died 3 years past and left her his shop, his books, and his trade, which the village had let her keep quietly because there was no other healer within a day's walk, and a sick child does not care about the sex of the hand that mixes its physic. She attended the dale for 3 years. Fevers, agues, the birthing of women and lambs both, the setting of bones, the easing of the dying. She knew her work. I believed her because she spoke of it the way a good soldier speaks of soldiering, without boasting and without doubt. The old Baron, Lord Ellerby, had taken ill in the autumn, a wasting. He could not keep food and he burned, and his hands and feet went numb and then agonizing by turns, and his hair came away in the comb, and lines showed white across his nails. The physician from York, brought down at Sir Marcus's expense and Sir Marcus's insistence, had called it a cancer of the stomach, and dosed the old man with things that did no good, and Nell had been called in only at the very end, when the physician had ridden home and the Baron was past saving, to ease his passing. "And I sat with him," she said, looking into the fire, "through the last night. And I have sat with the dying more times than I can count, and I know how a body lets go. And this was not that. This was a body being pulled apart. And the white lines on the nails, mise lines, my father called them, he'd seen them once in a man who'd taken ratsbane, and the burning in the hands and feet, and the smell." She stopped and swallowed. "There was a smell, faint, on his breath, and once when I helped the manservant clear away the wine he'd been given for his stomach, on the dregs of the cup. Garlic, but not garlic. My father wrote of it. Arsenic has a smell, if you know it. Most physicians don't, because most physicians never sit up all night with the dying holding the cup." She looked at me. "He was poisoned, slowly, over weeks, in his wine, which only ever came from one hand, because he trusted no servant with it near the end, only his brother. Only Sir Marcus brought him his wine." "And you said this," I said, aloud. "I said it to the physician, who told me I was a hysterical girl, and that the grief of a lonely spinster who fancied herself a doctor had unhinged me. I said it to the curate, who was frightened. I said it to the magistrate's clerk, who wrote it down and then, I think, showed what he'd written to Sir Marcus, because that very night 2 men came to my father's shop, and I was warned by the baker's boy in time to go out the back. And I have been running through these hills for 4 days since, and every soul I'd have turned to for help is either Sir Marcus's tenant or Sir Marcus's debtor, and there is no one." She said this last without drama, as a fact. "There is no magistrate in this dale who is not in his pocket. There is no lord who will hear me. And now the crown itself has sent a wolf to close the matter, so I suppose there is no king who will hear me either." She lifted her chin. "So, you have found me, and you know now what I know. What will you do?" I did not answer at once. The fire snapped between us. Outside, the wind had risen again and was searching the stones of the hut, and somewhere below in the dark the murderer's men were quartering the moor for a woman who had done nothing but tell the truth, and I was, for the first time in 15 years, unsure what I was. I want to tell you that I answered nobly. I did not. What I said was, "Do you have proof?" Because that was the crown's habit in me still, you see, the reflex of the tidy mind, that a truth without proof is only a nuisance, and that a nuisance can be closed. She heard the reflex in it, and something in her face closed like a door. "Proof," she said. "The proof is in the ground, in his poor body, with the arsenic still in his hair and his bones, where it stays for years. My father wrote of that too. Dig him up and give him to an honest physician in London who knows the Marsh test, and there's your proof. But the man who'd order the digging is the man who did the killing, so the proof will lie in the churchyard until Judgment Day. That's the whole art of it, isn't it? That's why it's done with poison and not a knife. There's never any proof that the right man can be made to look at." She wrapped my cloak tighter. "You'd know more of that than I would." That struck home, and she meant it too. I sat with it, and I found, sitting with it, that the last 15 years of my life had arranged themselves in front of me like a company on parade, and that I could not look at a single rank of them without flinching. I had closed a great many matters. I had told myself, each time, that the crown's judgment stood behind me, that I was a servant and not a principal, that the men whose names I never learned had weighed the thing before it ever reached me. And here, at last, was a matter the crown wished closed, and I could see the weighing of it plainly, and the weighing was this, that an honest woman's truth was inconvenient to a settled succession, and that it was cheaper to bury the woman than to disturb the peace. That was the crown's justice. That was the thing I served. I had suspected it for years, I think, in the place where a man keeps the truths he cannot afford, and I had refused to look. Nell Crew, with her frozen feet and her satchel of physic and her stubborn, steady eyes, had made me look. "I'll tell you what I'll do," I said, and my voice sounded strange to me because I was making a decision that would end the life I had built, and I could hear my old life dying in it. "I'll get you out of this dale alive, and I'll get you to a magistrate who is not in his pocket, in a county where his pocket doesn't reach, and I'll stand beside you while you say what you've said to me, and I'll add my own name to it, and my name, whatever else it is a name that even a crooked bench cannot pretend not to hear. And then we'll see whether there's an honest man left in England to dig up a poisoned baron. That's what I'll do." She stared at me. "Why?" she said. "Because I've spent my life being the thing they sent to close matters like this," I said, "and I find I don't want to be it anymore." It was not a gallant answer. It was not even at that moment an answer about her. It was about me and my own soul, which I had believed dead and which had just disgracefully late sat up. But she heard the truth in it, and the truth, I think, reached her where gallantry would not have. She looked at me a moment longer, and then she nodded once, a small, precise professional nod, as though I were a fever that had finally broken, and she said, "Then we should sleep in shifts and go before first light, and not by the way we came." And I understood that she had decided to trust me, not because she was foolish, but because she had weighed me too, and she had judged me the way she judged a poison or a wound on the evidence, and found in me something worth the wager. No one had judged me, and found me worth anything in a very long time. We slept in shifts. When it was her turn to sleep, she did so instantly and completely, the sleep of the utterly exhausted, curled in my cloak with her satchel under her head, and I sat and fed the fire and watched her, and I did not think of the men on the moor. I thought about a village that had let a woman doctor them because they needed her, and had let a murderer chase her out into the snow because they feared him more, and I thought that this was the world I had spent my life keeping in good order, and I did not like the order of it. Toward the small hours the wind dropped and the cold came down hard and clean, and the stars came out through a rent in the cloud, more stars than I had seen in years, and I sat in that little stone hut on the roof of the world beside a sleeping woman I had been sent to kill, and I felt, for the first time since I was a boy, something I can only call the beginning of a life. We went before dawn. The blizzard had blown itself out and left the moor scoured and hard and glittering under a sky just going gray in the east, and the cold was a living thing that took the breath at the door. Nell's clothes had dried stiff by the fire, and I had wrapped her feet in strips torn from my own shirt inside her ruined boots, and she walked, though it cost her. We could not both ride far in that cold. The horse would founder in the drifts with two up. So we went slowly, I leading the horse and Nell walking in the beaten track I made. And when she failed, I put her up and walked myself, and so we crossed the tops as the light came. I meant to go north and east, out of the dale entirely, over the watershed and down into the next valley where the road ran to Kirkby and the great world beyond, to a market town with a mail coach and 3 counties on, a bench I knew of and a judge I had once done a service and never called in. It was a long way, but it was away from Sir Marcus, whose reach, I judged, ended at the ridge of his own dale, because a small murderer's power is always local. It is a candle, not a sun. I judged, and I was right about the dale and wrong about the man, and the error nearly killed us both. For Sir Marcus was cleverer and more desperate than a small murderer usually is, and he had done what small men do when they have overreached. He had made himself indispensable to larger men. Word had gone up, as word does, and the quiet men in London, my own masters, had heard that the loose end in the north had acquired a protector, a horseman, a stranger who had snatched the woman off the very hillside where the matter was to have been closed. And they had put 2 and 2 together, as such men always eventually do, and they had done the thing I had not foreseen because I had never in my life been on this side of it. They had sent word back down to Sir Marcus that the wolf they had dispatched had turned, and that he was now, himself, a matter to be closed, and that the man who closed both matters together would find the crown very grateful and very forgetful about the manner of a baron's death. I learned all this later, What I knew at the time on the fourth day was that the pursuit had changed. On the moor above Ellerby, Sir Marcus's men had been 3 ruffians beating the heather. On the road down toward Kirkby at the ford of the Kelder where the beck ran through a deep cut between crags, they were waiting for us, and they were more, and they had horses, and among them rode a lean grey man in good boots whom I knew not by name. I never knew their names but by kind. He was one of us. One of the quiet men's own. They had sent one of my own trade to close me. The ford is the place where I nearly lost her, so I must tell you the ford. The Kelder in that reach runs fast and deep between 2 shoulders of rock, and in a hard winter it freezes at the margins into shelves of white ice, while the center stays black and racing. The only crossing for 2 miles is a ford where the beck spreads shallow over gravel, but in that cold the shallows had frozen into a treacherous glaze over stones, and the black race in the middle was 6 feet across, and God knew how deep. We came down to it in the last gray light of the 4th day, half frozen at the end of our strength, and they were on the far bank, 5 of them, and the lean gray man, and they had let us come down into the cut, where the crags rose on either side and there was no way back but the way we'd come, because they knew that the way we'd come was where the other 3 were, closing the door behind us. I understood the trap the instant I saw them, and I understood that I had walked us into it because I had been thinking like a fugitive and not like a hunter, and I had forgotten that I was being hunted by men who thought exactly as I thought. There is a particular horror in being outmatched at your own art. I felt it then, and I had a frozen woman on my horse and a beck at my back and 5 men and a professional in front of me, and no honest reckoning gave us a way out. "Send her across," the lean gray man called across the water, conversational, almost kind. "Send the woman across Harrowmore and ride away, and it's the old arrangement, the matter closes. You were never here, no one need know the wolf slipped his collar. You've a great deal to lose. She's nobody. Send her across." She's nobody. I have heard those words, or words like them, in a dozen tongues from a dozen men who dealt in the disposal of inconvenient people, and I had used them myself. God help me, in my own heart, to make the disposals easier. She's nobody. And I looked at Nell Crew, who had gone very still on the horse, who had heard the offer and understood it entirely, and was waiting again on her dignity, to see what I would do, who had already, I realized, prepared herself to be handed over, because she had spent 4 days learning that no one in the world would choose her over their own skin, and she expected me in the end to be no different. And I found that the words "she's nobody" had become, in my mouth, the most obscene words I knew. "She's the only somebody I've met in 15 years, I said, not to him, but I said it aloud, and I heard Nell's breath catch behind me. "And you'll not have her." Then I did the mad thing, the thing that had no reckoning in it, the thing that a man does only when he has decided that his life is worth spending on one throw. I turned the horse, not away from the water but along it upstream, to where the frozen shelf ran out over the black race almost to the far side, a shelf of ice that no sane man would trust with a horse's weight, and I put Nell down onto her feet on the near shelf, and I said, low and fast, "When I go into the water, you cross on the ice upstream, where it's whole, go on your belly, spread your weight, don't stand, and you run for the Kirkby Road, and you don't look back, whatever you hear. Do you understand me? Whatever you hear." "No," she said, "no, you can't." "Do you understand me?" I said. And then I drove my horse into the black race. It is a strange thing to choose to go into water that cold. The body knows it is dying and screams it, and every animal part of you fights the rains. But a horse and a man thrashing in the black center of a beck is a thing that 5 hunters cannot ignore, and they did not ignore it. They came down to the water's edge, all of them, drawn to the drama of it to watch the wolf drown, and while they watched me fight the killing cold in the race, Nell Crew went across the whole ice upstream on her belly, spreading her weight the way I had told her, silent, invisible in the gray light against the gray ice, and reached the far bank, and vanished into the crags toward the Kirkby Road. They did not see her go. They were watching me, And that, in the end, was the whole of my plan, if a thing decided in 3 seconds can be called a plan, to be so loud a death that no one would look for a quiet escape. The cold nearly finished it for them. I do not remember all of it. I remember the black water closing over, and the horse screaming, and the current, and my hands unable to feel the reins, and the far bank impossibly far, and then the near bank. I had let the race carry me back to the near side downstream, out of their sight around the shoulder of the crag, and I remember dragging myself out onto snow with no feeling below my chest, and lying there certain I was dying and thinking, with a clarity I had never had in all my ordered years, that it was a good death. The first clean thing I had done. And then I remember hands, small hands, and a hoarse, furious voice saying words I could not make out, and being hauled and dragged and rolled, and a fire. She had gone back. She had not run for the Kirkby Road. She had crossed the ice as I told her, and then she had gone up the far bank out of sight, and doubled back down to the near side in the dusk, while the hunters cast about upstream for a body that had gone the other way. And she had found me half dead on the snow. And she had, with a strength I still do not understand in a woman that size and that spent, dragged me into a cleft in the crag out of the wind, and got my sodden clothes off me, and got a fire going with the flint from my saddle-bag. She had taken the saddle-bag before I drove the horse in. I never even saw her do it. And she had put her own dried-out warm body against my frozen one under both our cloaks, and brought me back from the country I had been walking into. I woke in the black of night in a cleft in the rock with a small fire hissing and Nell Cruz's arms around me and her voice in my ear saying, over and over, low and fierce, "You don't get to do that. You don't get to decide to die for me. You don't get to." And I understood dimly, through the returning pain of a thawing body, that she was weeping. This steady, dry-eyed woman who had not wept once in 4 days of being hunted was weeping now in fury because I had tried to spend my life for hers. And I understood something else too, something that reordered the world, that I mattered to her. Not as a protector, not as a name, not as a wolf who might be useful. That I, Silas Cade, mattered to her as a man, the way she had come, in 4 days of frozen nights, to matter to me. "I told you to run," I said. My voice was a ruin. "You told me a great many things," she said. "I've decided not to take all of them as gospel." And then, after a while, more quietly, into the dark, "You said I was the only somebody you'd met in 15 years. "I did." "I don't think that's true," she said. "But I think you believe it. And I've been thinking, while I've been keeping you from dying, that a man who could believe that of me, of a nobody apothecary's girl the whole world was content to bury, that a man like that isn't the wolf he thinks he is. I don't think he ever was. I think he was just a boy someone put a knife in the hand of and told him what he was until he believed it." She was quiet a moment. "My father used to say the worst poisons are the slow ones because the body forgets what it was before the poison. I think you forgot what you were before them. That's all. I don't think you're past digging up." No one had ever said such a thing to me. No one had ever bothered to think me worth the saying of it. I lay in the dark in her arms with my life coming painfully back into me, and I wept too, the second time in my adult life, and she held me, and neither of us spoke of it again, and I have never in the years since been able to speak of it without stopping, so I will not try now. The hunters lost us. They had a body they thought was drowned and a woman they thought was fled, and by the time they understood they had neither, the storm had come back down and covered every track, and we were 3 days gone toward Kirkby by ways only a healer who had walked those moors all her life could have found. She led after the ford. I followed. The wolf followed the apothecary's daughter through the snow and was glad to. I will not draw out the journey out of the north, though it was hard, and there were days I thought the cold or the hunger would end what the river had not. What I will tell you is what happened when we came at last down out of the high country into the softer dales to the east, where Sir Marcus's name meant nothing, and the Crown's quiet men did not think to look, because they were still dragging the kelder for my corpse. We came to a market town called Aldbury on a Saturday with the snow turning to rain, 2 ragged half-starved travelers, and I did a thing I had not done in 15 years. I used my name openly. I walked into the best inn in Aldbury, filthy and frostbitten, and I told them who I was, the Duke of Harrowmore, and I watched the whole room change. And for the first time in my life I was glad of the fear my name carried, because I bent it, at last, to a decent purpose. I sent for the magistrate of that county, a hard old man named Sir Edmund Thrale, whom I had once, years before, saved from a scandal that would have ruined him, and who I knew to be, beneath his hardness, an honest one of the few. He came within the hour, and he found me warming a nobody apothecary's girl by his best fire, and he sat down across from us, and I told him everything. Everything. Not only Sir Marcus and the poisoned Baron, everything. What I was, what I had done, whom I served, the 15 years of closed matters, the letter I had burned, the order to bury a woman for telling the truth, and my turning from it, and the Crown's turning on me for the turning. I laid the whole of my ruined life on Sir Edmund Thrale's table, because I had understood, somewhere in the snow, that I could not save Nell Crewe with a clean lie, that the whole art of the men who had made me was the clean lie, and that the only weapon they had no defense against was a man of rank who would simply, publicly, tell the truth, and let it cost him everything. Sir Edmund heard me out. He was a long time silent. Then he said, "You understand what you're asking. You're asking me to move against a settled succession, on the word of a poisoned man 3 counties away, and a woman the physicians call hysterical, and a duke who admits himself the Crown's own assassin. You're asking me to make an enemy of the men who make and unmake magistrates. You're handing me a rope and asking me to hang us both." "I'm asking you to have the Baron dug up," I said, "and given to an honest man who knows the Marsh test, and to let the arsenic in his bones speak for itself. And Miss Crewe will tell the bench what she saw, and I'll tell it what I am. And if the truth costs us everything, then it costs us everything, but it will be told in open court by a duke and a magistrate, where the quiet men can't bury it, and after it's told they'll have to kill a great many more of us than they can afford, to keep it quiet." I leaned forward. "They deal in cheapness, Sir Edmund, it's all they are. Murder by poison because a knife's too dear. Burying a woman because a trial's too dear. Make it dear. That's the whole of it. Make the truth too expensive to bury, and they'll let it stand because they've no conscience to appeal to, only a ledger." Nell had said nothing through all of this. Now she spoke, and I have never forgotten it, because it was the moment I understood fully what she was. "There's one more thing," she said, in her steady voice, to the magistrate. "You'll want to know why you should believe an apothecary's girl over a York physician. So here's a thing your honest man can test, that I can tell you now, before ever the body's dug, and if I'm wrong you may hang me for a liar. Arsenic taken over Weeks lodges in the hair and the nails in bands, 1 band for each dose. Cut a lock of the Baron's hair from the root and lay it out and test it inch by inch, and you'll find the poison comes in a rhythm, heavier some weeks, lighter others, and the heavy weeks will be the weeks Sir Marcus dined at Ellerby, which the household book will show, because he'll not have dosed the cup on the days he was away and couldn't watch it drunk. Match the bands in the hair to the dinners in the book, and there's your murderer's own hand, written in a dead man's hair in his own dinner engagements. My father read of the method in a German book. It has never, that I know, been used in an English court." She sat back. "I am not a hysterical girl, Sir Edmund. I am a better physician than the one they paid to lie. That is my whole crime, and it is why they want me dead." Sir Edmund Thrale looked at Nell Crewe for a long moment, and I watched an old, hard, skeptical man revise, in real time, everything he had assumed when he walked into that room. Then he turned to me and said, "This one you've dragged out of the snow, do you know what you have here, Harrowmore?" "Yes," I said, "I do." "He had the Baron dug up. It took a warrant, and the warrant took a fight, and the fight went, as I had promised, all the way up to the quiet men who tried, exactly as I had told Sir Edmund they would, to make it go away cheaply, a word here, a threat there, a suggestion that the Duke of Harrowmore had gone mad in the northern cold and was not to be believed. But I had done the one thing they could not answer. I had made it public and dear. I had written, from Aldbury, over my own seal, to 3 other lords I knew to be honest and jealous of the crown's reach, and told them the whole of it, and named the men who wrote to me unsigned, and dared the crown to silence a duke who had put it all in writing to 3 witnesses. And the crown, weighing the cost as it always weighed everything, found the burying too expensive at last, and let the truth stand, not out of justice, never out of justice, but because I had made justice cheaper than murder, which is the only argument such men have ever understood. The Baron's hair told the tale exactly as Nell had said it would. An honest physician down from Edinburgh, who knew the Marsh test and had heard, faintly, of the German method, laid out the lock inch by inch and found the poison in bands, and Sir Edmund laid the household book beside it, and the heavy bands fell, every one, on the week Sir Marcus had dined at Ellerby. It was, the Edinburgh man said, the clearest thing he had ever seen, a murderer's calendar, written in his victim's own hair, kept by his own hand. Sir Marcus was taken at Ellerby in the spring. I will not tell you what became of him, because it is not the part of the story that matters, and because Nell, when it was done, did not gloat, and I have tried to learn from her not to. It is enough to say that the Dale got an honest baron at last, a distant cousin, and that the old servant who had knelt at his master's grave in the snow lived to see the murderer answer for it, and wept again, differently. But I have run ahead of the thing that is the true end of this, which is not the murderer's fall but the healer's rising, and mine. There came an evening in Aldbury, after the warrant was fought for and won, but before the Baron was in the ground a second time, when the danger had drained out of our days and left, suddenly, an ordinary quiet, the first ordinary quiet either of us had known in weeks. Nell had been given a decent room and decent clothes and had, under warm food and safety, come back to herself, and I saw for the first time, across a supper table with no killers in the hills, what she was when she was not being hunted. She was quick and dry and kind in an unsentimental way, and she laughed. I had never heard her laugh, a low, startled laugh, as though it surprised her too. And I sat across the table from her, a man who had spent 15 years without a single evening he would have wanted to keep, and I understood that I did not want this evening to end, and that I had not, in truth, wanted any of our terrible evenings to end, even the frozen ones, even the Ford, because she had been in all of them. "You're starring, Your Grace," she said. "I'm allowed," I said. "I paid a horse and very nearly my life for the privilege." She looked down at her hands, and I saw, wonderingly, that I had made her shy, this woman who had faced down a professional killer across a river and not blinked. "You'll go back to Harrowmore," she said, "when this is finished, and I'll go—" She stopped. "I don't know where I'll go. There's nothing in Ellerby for me now. The shop's likely ransacked, and a woman who accused a baron of murder and turned out right is not a woman a nervous village wants mixing its physic, whatever the truth of it." She said it without self-pity, as she said everything, but I heard under it a loneliness as deep as my own, the loneliness of the useful and unloved, and it broke something in me that 15 years of killing had not been able to break. "Come to Harrowmore," I said. She went very still. "As what?" she said, not coy. She never was. She wanted the thing said plainly, because she had been offered dishonest things before and had learned to make men say what they meant. So I said what I meant. I got up, this feared man, the king's wolf, the Duke of Harrowmore, and I came around that supper table and I knelt down in front of Nell Crewe, the apothecary's daughter whom the whole world had been content to bury, and I took her hand, the same hand I had pulled up onto my saddle on a frozen hillside, warm now and steady, and mine if she would let it be, and I said, "As my wife. Not my healer, though God knows the county needs one and there's none better in England. Not my mistress, not my anything but my wife, before every sneering lord in 3 counties, and let them make of it what they like. You went back for me at the ford when I told you to run. You put your own life against the cold to keep mine in me, and you told me I wasn't past digging up. No one has ever thought me worth the trouble. You did. I have nothing to give you that's worth what you gave me, but I've a name that will keep you safe in a house that's been cold 30 years and needs exactly the sort of warmth you'd bring to it, and a self that you seem, against all sense, to think is worth saving. Marry me, please. I've never asked anyone for anything, and I'm asking you." She was quiet so long I thought I had ruined it, and then she said, in a voice that shook for the first time since the ford, "You know I'm nobody. You heard the man say it at the river. She's nobody. It's what they'll all say at Harrowmore, in London, everywhere. The Duke married a nobody, an apothecary's girl, a healer they say murdered a baron's reputation. It'll follow you the rest of your life." "Let it," I said. "I spent 15 years being what they called me. I'd like to spend the rest being what you call me. You said I was a boy someone put a knife in the hand of, be the one who takes it out." And Nell Crew, who had faced down every kind of death in the snow without weeping, put her free hand over her mouth and wept, and then she laughed through it, that low, startled laugh, and she said, "Get up, you great foolish wolf, you'll ruin your knees on this floor, and yes, yes, God help us both. Yes." We were married at Aldbury, quietly, by Sir Edmund's own chaplain, with the old Edinburgh physician and the honest magistrate and a distant baron's cousin for witnesses, and no sneering lords at all, because I found I did not care in the least whether the sneering lords approved, and I have not from that day wasted an hour of my life on the approval of anyone who would call my wife a nobody. I took her home to Harrowmore in the spring, when the moors we had nearly died on were purple and gold and gentle, and pretending they had never meant us harm. The house was cold, as I had said, 30 years cold, a great gray pile that had known no woman and no laughter since my mother died. Nell walked through it that first evening with her healer's eye, seeing not the grandeur but the neglect, the damp in the east wing, the empty still-room that had not brewed a physic in a generation, the tenants she had already begun asking about on the ride up, who was sick, who was birthing, who had no one, and I watched her take my cold dead house in her 2 hands the way she had taken my cold dead life, and begin, quietly, without fuss, to bring it back. She made Harrowmore a place people came to. Not for me, never for me. My name still cleared a room, and I was glad enough to let it. They came for her. The Duchess of Harrowmore, who would ride out in any weather to a laboring woman or a fevered child, who kept the finest still-room in the north, who had once, they whispered, been an apothecary's girl, and had faced down a murderer and been right, she became, in a handful of years, the most loved woman in 3 counties, and the strange feared Duke who had married her became, by the warmth of standing near her, something almost like beloved himself, or at least forgiven, which for a man like me is nearly the same thing. The quiet men never troubled us again. I had made myself too public, too well-connected in my defiance, too expensive to touch, and besides, they had lost their taste for me and I for them, and there is a kind of peace in being of no more use to wicked men. I gave up their work entirely. I have not closed a matter for the Crown from that day to this. When they wrote to me once more in the old unsigned way, testing whether the wolf might be brought back to heel, I gave the letter, unburned, to my wife, and she read it, and she raised one eyebrow, and she wrote across it in her clear apothecary's hand a single line of a German book about poisons, something about the body remembering, at last, what it was before, and she sent it back to them unsigned, and they never wrote again. I do not know what they made of it. I did not care. I am an old man now, writing this by a fire that has been warm for 30 years, in a house full of the sound of my wife's work, and these long years, our children's voices and now our grandchildren's. Nell is in the still-room as I write. I can hear her, and the girl she is training, an apothecary's granddaughter from Aldbury with clever hands, and the smell of some good bitter physic drifts up through the whole warm house. She is gray now, my Nell, and moves more slowly to the laboring women than she did, but they still send for her before any physician, and she still goes. People sometimes ask me, the bold ones, the young ones who did not know me when I was the king's wolf, how a man like me came to marry a woman like her. They mean it as flattery to us both, the Duke and the healer, the great match. And I never tell them the truth, because the truth is too large for a supper table, but I will set it down here, for whoever finds this after I am gone. I did not save her. That is the thing they never understand. They think it a rescue, the great feared Duke and the frightened girl in the snow, and they think I lifted her out of her lowness into my height. It was the other way entirely. She was standing steady on a frozen hillside with death an hour behind her when I first saw her, and she looked up at the wolf that had come to bury her and refused to be afraid. And in that refusal, she reached down into the frozen dead place where my soul should have been, and she took it in her two warm hands, and she would not let it go. She went back for me at the ford. She told me I was not past digging up. Every good thing I have been for 40 years, every warm hour in this once cold house, every child and grandchild, every tenant healed, every night I have slept without the old dreams, all of it, I owe to a nobody apothecary's daughter whom the whole ordered world agreed was worth less than the trouble of a trial, and who turned out to be worth more than all of it. Worth a duke's name and a wolf's soul, and 40 years of a life I did not deserve, and would not trade for any other ever offered to any man. They marked her for death and sent a wolf to find her, and the wolf found her and knelt and was saved.